Happy New Year and welcome into a national championship edition of the MVFC First and Goal podcast. I'm Kelly Burke and very pleased today to be joined by former NFL and North Dakota State standout defensive end, Phil Hansen, who is currently the Bison radio color analyst for football. Phil, happy 2018 and welcome to the show.
Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah. Well, you have a busy week ahead, but before we dive into, all things Bison football, I did want to get your reaction. Your longtime and former team, the Buffalo Bills, are back in the postseason for the first time since 1999. And so, how elated are you just to see them back in the playoffs?
Well, Kelly, let me give you a little history on that. And see how old I am now. I'm 49 years old. I played on the last playoff team that the Bills were in 1999. It was actually the Music City Miracle. Some people might remember that, where we lost the game on a questionable throwback across the field on a kickoff. But the last time about Ben, and I actually played in that game.
Nice. Well, as we said, the national championship game coming up this Saturday, it's a busy week for you. Take me through the preparation, for that game and getting ready to call it, what you've done so far. And then you're getting ready, obviously, to fly to Frisco tomorrow. What the preparation will look like for the rest of the week.
Well, for me, it's not a lot. I mean, I went back and I checked on the last three games that James Madison played, and when I get down to Frisco, I'll watch the game that NDSU lost to them in the Fargo Dome, the semifinal game last year. I'll watch that game just to kind of refresh my memory as to the things they did. But just getting used to the names again on James Madison and watching them from a distance all season. But the preparation will be. I've done most of my preparation already. I've got my notes all made up. So. Just kind of take it in, see what the local B writers are writing. I'm very interested to see if it's a fallacy or if it's actually true that our two cornerbacks for North Dakota State may be able to play. Yeah. I don't know if that's a little gamesmanship, if that's actually legitimate.
Yeah, and it seems like that's going on with both sides too, because I know their coach, Coach Houston, was kind of doing the same thing. Yeah,
I guess that's part of the game, and when got 3 weeks off, a lot of that stuff comes into play a little bit. But once the game starts, there's no hiding what you have and what you do not have.
Yeah. Well, I was talking, with your broadcast partner, Jeff Culhane, earlier this week. And, one thing he told me about you is that, you have a very strong desire to still keep getting better in the broadcast booth, and that probably a lot of it goes back to just that, kind of player mindset that you had from playing football. And that after the season last year, you guys sat down and, you talked about and you asked him, what are ways that I can get better, ways that I can be better. So it's obviously not something you need to do, but it's something that you want to do. Why is that so important to you? And, how seriously do you take your role as the radio analyst for North Dakota State?
I guess I do take it seriously. Maybe it's just built in. I mean, of all of my football playing days, if there's 70 plays in a game, what keeps me up the night after a game is the 3 plays that I screwed up or wasn't in the right position. So, I mean, I guess I've kind of carried that over to the radio broadcast. I got asked to do this on a whim, basically. And I said, what is color? What do you got to do? Or you just got to talk about the game. That was my only education I had coming into it. And I just, I believe that you always hone your skill or better your trade a little bit. So I've asked the guys, I said, hey, I can take it. Tell me things I can do to improve on. And so I've always asked them. And at the end of every year, we get together and just talk about how it went, what some things we can improve on, and some constructive criticism. And I take that and use it and keep track of it.
Yeah. You had the great fortune of having played in 3 Super Bowls for the Bills, and then also, having won 2 national championships with the Bison. When you look back now on those games, what stands out the most?
Well, they're different. I mean, college is different than pro, and actually, I was on 3 national championships with NDSU.
Oh, 3.
Actually,
Okay, I'm glad you good. I'm glad you corrected me.
1986. That was probably more work than the 88 and 90 teams that we won it. But 1986, I was truly a redshirt. But the colleges, the college championships, I think we were more of a tight-knit group. Not that we weren't tight-knit in the pros, but I'm still friends with a lot of the guys from college on those teams. In the pros, it's more of a, not even a national, it's an international stage, really. But having not won a Super Bowl, we lost all 3 Super Bowls that I played in. Having not won one, it just doesn't live up to the championships that we had in college.
Yeah. Do you still think about those games ever? The Super Bowls?
Yeah, actually, and this year it's kind of unique because the Super Bowl is coming back to Minnesota. Well, the last Super Bowl in Minnesota was my first Super Bowl, Super Bowl 26. We played in Minneapolis. So, I'm still skirting around trying to snag some tickets, which is probably a long shot, but I've told all my connections at the Buffalo Bills and anybody I know, so I'm going to try to get some tickets. But I'll probably go down for a couple days beforehand, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday beforehand. If there's some activities, go down for that. It's pretty exciting time. And since it's so close to home, I figure I'd attempt to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Take me through as a player, as a guy that's been there. And I know it's not, it's more pomp and circumstance now, in this day and age, and, the game's in Frisco now. But what this week is like from a player's perspective as far as, playing for a national championship and just the emotions leading up to Saturday.
Yeah, I think more so, when we played back in the 80s, it was playoff game. We might have had 2 weeks in between our championship game, but that long layoff, and then you got Christmas and New Year's thrown in there. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a lot. There's a lot of distraction in there. You got to keep your eye on the prize, and it's never been so more critical this year, because I think this is going to be a game where the Bison are going to certainly have their hands full. Not that they haven't in past games or past years, but James Madison is a contender. I mean, they haven't lost, so I mean they're the real deal. That is a solid team.
Well, speaking of James Madison, what's neat about the game this Saturday is it's, the first time I believe since 2011 that it's the number 1 and number 2 team playing each other for the national title. And like you said, they're very, very evenly matched, 2 of the best defenses in the country. Both teams have overcome a lot of injuries this season. When you look at JMU, what jumps out to you about that squad?
You know what? Some of my 30,000 foot level points that I came up with they remind me of NDSU. They try to run the ball. If they can't, they pass. They've got good receivers, and they play good defense, which is not flashy. It's not sexy, but it wins football games. And as I watched the games, I got into the second game, and I'm telling myself, this team reminds me of NDSU. They've got good talent at all those positions. The receivers are good. Their back is tremendous, and their quarterback, not going to throw 50-yard bombs every other play, but he manages that game so well. He has great decision making. If the pocket breaks down, he moves one way a little bit. He recognizes that pressure's coming. He either tucks it down or throws the ball away. Doesn't make mistakes. Brian Shore reminds me of Easton Stick a lot, and a lot of players remind me of Bison players.
Yeah. Well, speaking of one of their players, they have a young man, Andrew Ankara, who is a defensive end for them, an All-American and NFL prospect. And as a former defensive lineman, what do you feel like are your thoughts on slowing somebody down of his caliber?
Yeah, he's definitely a guy that you're going to have to keep an eye on, but he's got some other teammates around the defensive line. I look at them as a unit. That defensive line is tough. They're smart. They're well coached. They're strong. They're going to be tough to deal with. But you know what? NDSU's offensive line wouldn't want it any other way. They're good. They're big. They're tough. They're strong. So I really look forward to that matchup. And, I'm an old lineman, so I don't always keep my eye on the receivers and the quarterbacks. I'm watching that line play. So I'll be very interested to watch how that all plays out.
Yeah, if you had to, break it down into a couple points, what do you feel like will be keys for a Bison win Saturday?
Yeah, I have broken it down, and what I remember from last year's game was that we ran the ball. The run from their corners and safeties was tremendous. So when we were running, it looked like we'd get an 8-yard run, and we only got a 2-yard run. I can't remember how many times I remember that. Thinking, okay, there it's opening up, and now it closes. So we had to go to the pass. And those corners and safeties that they had, I mean, they were locked down for us. R.J. Urzendowski couldn't get open. Easton Stick couldn't deliver him the ball because he wasn't open. And that's just a credit to their corners. Moreland is, he's got a ton of interceptions. Their safeties, they work so well in tandem. They work together. They're really good at supporting the run and covering the pass.
Yeah.
Difference is going to be, can our receivers get open? Can our receivers get open? And have we improved our receiving core from last year? And I think the game will evolve around that aspect.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's dive in a little bit to, the current NDSU squad. What has impressed you in particular about this year's North Dakota State defense and just the run that this team has had so far through the playoffs?
Resilient, I guess. You talk about James Madison. I know they had a ton of injuries. NDSU's had a ton of injuries too. And now with the two corners this last game that are supposedly out or quasi maybe going to play, we'll see how that all plays out. But just the resiliency and not only this year, but year after year. I mean, they've got a good product, they got a good program, and you either buy into it or you don't. There's a lot of kids that go by the wayside right away because they're not willing to either put in the effort or buy into the philosophy, and they go by the wayside. And these aren't just players; they're good athletes. Well, you got to buy in because this is what we know works. It has. We've got a track record. So just the year in and year out work that they do and the resiliency of the team. They have a next man up mentality, and that next man up has been really good for a lot of years. That next guy up, when he gets hurt and the fans are crying, that next guy up isn't very bad. He's a pretty good player.
Yeah.
Bill Cox is a guy we didn't even mention at the beginning of the year. Now, I don't know what we do without him.
Yeah. Well, even Seth Wilson at running back, remember when everybody went down at running back and everybody's going, oh no, and then it's been fine.
And another example, the next guy up mentality. I mean, and it seems to work.
Yeah. Well, North Dakota State, I mean, they've really been a dominant football program since the 1960s. As you said earlier, you were part of 3 national championship squads. 2 of them were unbeaten when you were playing. And back then you guys played in I believe it was the North Central Conference in Division II. But what similarities do you see from the recent North Dakota State championship teams to the ones from the 80s that you were a part of?
Oh boy. I've been asked that question a ton of times, and could the 86 team have played with this team in their prime? And I don't know. I just get into that too much. I guess it's fun to listen to, but I don't interject too much because I don't know. But you're right. It was the NCC, the North Central Conference, and it's really kind of that I-29 corridor is kind of coming back. South Dakota State and North Dakota State went to Division I at the same time, and now University of South Dakota and in a couple of years, University of North Dakota will be back. Those were 4 of the mainstay teams in the North Central Conference, and it's back. And we've got better competition too. The basketball is a Summit League, but the Missouri Valley with Northern Iowa, and there's a whole bunch of good teams there too in football. Yeah. So it's improved the conference tremendously.
Yeah. Well, my conversation with Phil Hansen continues in just a second, but if you're enjoying this edition of the MVFC First and Goal podcast, check out all the Lineup Media Group offerings, sports and non-sports podcasts. Now back to the show. Phil, you were really close with former Bison play-by-play man Scott Miller. And, following his death, you helped spearhead a scholarship in his name and his honor. And I believe you guys have raised over $50,000. And I understand the scholarship is given to a North Dakota State student athlete who wants to go into communications. And this year, the first one went to Desmond Kane. And so what memories, first of all, of Scott, do you cherish the most?
Yeah, Scott Miller was my partner, and he died of cancer. It's been 2 years now. It was tough to watch him go downhill. And I remember him the last championship game he did. He couldn't carry his bags off the plane. I had to carry them for him. But wow. His voice was always strong right till the end, and just a gentleman. And you talk about a guy who loved his trade and wanted to be a perfectionist at it. I mean, Scott was that guy. And when he passed away, we he didn't have his family was NDSU. He didn't have a wife. His parents had died. He had two brothers. So we said, in a few years, nobody's going to ever remember Scott. So we did. We started a scholarship fund for him. We raised about $23,000, and then we got a $25,000 anonymous contribution. So
wow.
We can give a $2,000 scholarship every year. In Scott's name and the parameters on the scholarship recipient are a student athlete in women's basketball, men's basketball, or football, because those are the sports Scott did at NDSU.
Okay.
So those a person in one of those sports meets the criteria, wants to go into communication or something to do with broadcasting, one of the student athletes will receive a $2,000 scholarship. So yeah, it was nice to actually put that together, and it was a lot of work. But in memory of Scott and all the great things he did, I hope somebody 10 years asks who was Miller, and they can go look him up and see what he did and what a fine job he did do of his trade.
Yeah, well, and what a fitting that Des is the first guy, because that's a guy that transferred in. And probably never had the opportunity to meet Scott. So I'm sure you guys have helped educate him, and just what a great guy he was and what a prominent voice he was.
Yep, absolutely. Desmond was a fine recipient for the first one, and we'll see. The athletic department picks who the athlete will be, determined on the parameters of the scholarship. So but I know every year I'll pay attention to who receives it, and if I ever get a chance, I'll nudge him and say, who Scott Miller was. So, I mean, it means something to me, but I'm old. Those young kids won't know, but maybe that's one chance to remind them.
Yeah. You grew up on a 4,000-acre farm in North Dakota, and I read, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you still help your brother manage a 1,300-acre farm. How did that upbringing shape you?
Well, actually, I got into the NFL, and my first signing bonus I used to buy some farmland in North Dakota. Everybody was telling me to buy a house or cars or stocks or bonds, and I guess I bought what I knew, and that was farmland. And it's been a good investment. My brother farms it now, but I have a 12-year-old son now, and we go back and we're planting some trees on the land, and so we go back hunting and doing a few things here and there. But my brother pretty much runs it. But yeah, it wasn't easy. It was I remember driving tractors to school and dropping them off at the dealership and walking across town to school. And when school was out, I'd bring the tractor home. That's just kind of the way you grow up in small town North Dakota. That's what you do. And, but it was a good upbringing. And, we had to work for everything we got, and things didn't come easy. And I remember asking to play sports. My dad initially said, no, we've got too much work on the farm to do. Well, playing sports was more to get off the farm, because when people say it's hard working playing sports, heck, I thought that was fun. All my friends thought it was work at practice. Heck, that was fun to me. If you want work, go out to the farm. I'll show you what work is.
Yeah, because I'd imagine on the farm you're probably getting up at, 5 or 6 in the morning and working, till 6 or 7 at night when the sun goes down. Yeah,
on a farm, you work when the work needs to be done, and that's usually in the spring and in the fall, planting and harvest. But, it's funny how your dad always finds something for you to do. It's cleaning the shop or running into town to get parts.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, this kind of goes to the powers of Google. So, it came up, actually, there was an article in the LA Times from when you were in college, and it was all about your family and growing up on a farm, and it talked to, it was an article about you and your brothers, but it was from when you were in college, and it still came up on Google. So
really?
Yeah. Well, you also, as one of the things that's kind of a passion for you, you officiate high school football and basketball games. What's the transition been like doing that, and why did you decide to specifically do that area, maybe not coaching?
Yeah, and I did. I got asked to coach when I first finished. I got asked to coach at high school and college level, and we had our 1-year-old daughter at the time, and coaching just I knew the demand that it would take, and I had 22 years of organized football, all consecutive in a row, and I just said I need a break from sports, and I just stepped back. And but the officiating thing kind of caught my eye. You get the best part. You get the game. You don't have to worry about meetings, practice, injuries. Kids not playing because of grades. I mean, you don't have to worry about any of that. So I kind of picked up the officiating in football and basketball, and I've kind of stuck with it. I'm actually doing a basketball game tonight.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, I kind of like it. You get the best part. You get the game, and you get a little exercise in the process. So I guess that's as good as I can do, keeping my competitive juices flowing, is just watching the kids out there.
Does it give you a new appreciation for the stripes? I mean, you obviously see it from a much different side when you're a player.
Well, it actually helps a lot with college football. When I see a flag coming from a certain spot, I can pretty much predict it's one of two calls. If they blow the whistle before the play, there's only 3 or 4 things that it can be. So it's really helped in the broadcasting booth tremendously. Now, there's some differences between high school and college that, we don't have any replay in high school. So there's been some issues with that. But no, it's been hugely helpful for me in the broadcast booth.
In 2012, you ran for a seat in the Minnesota Senate, and you lost what was a really close race. I'm just curious, where did your interest in politics develop?
I guess it kind of been laying in the weeds for some time, I guess. And I seemed like a good opportunity. There was a retiring senator, and it seemed like something I wanted to do, and just seemed like no opportunity better than the present. Didn't turn out like you said in the end, but it was a good learning experience. Met a ton of people, and I wouldn't have believed all the things that are happening in the district where I live, just out on farms and in towns, and just saw a lot. So yeah, it was bad to lose. It stinks to lose, but it was a good experience all in all.
Yeah. You're married and you have 3 kids. You've mentioned a couple of your kids in our talk so far. Will your family get a chance to come to Frisco with you? And what would you like to just mention or say just about your family and what they mean to you, just day-to-day life?
Well, I've got a 7-year-old Hope. She just started driving this summer. That's my daughter. She's into dance. So after Frisco, I'll be going to a lot of dance competitions in January and February on Saturdays. I will have my Dance Dad t-shirt probably worn for those competitions. Jillian is my second daughter at 14, and then my son Ross is 12.
Okay.
And I coached him in football, basketball, and baseball this summer. So I was his coach. He'll get into 7th grade and into the high school coaching circuit next year. So, but that was a good experience. He likes to snowmobile and plays video games. So none of my kids will be coming to Frisco. My wife did come to Frisco a few years ago, but there's too many kid activities going on now. So my wife will stay manage the fort while I'm gone for 3 or 4 days.
Nice. You are an ambassador for the NFL Heads Up program. And, the game is obviously, it's much different than when you played it back in the day. It just, not only in terms of rules, but just how injuries are approached now. Do you like the direction the game of football is headed?
Well, I'm a defensive guy too, so all the protections on the quarterback, I don't think it's fair actually. Now I understand that you want to protect the quarterback in a vulnerable position, but I think it's got to be. I mean, everybody out there should have equal protection, and I mean, we fought in the NFL for the chop block for years before that was implemented. That was defensive lineman. A chop block is when I'm engaged with an offensive lineman and another offensive lineman comes and cuts my knee out. Nobody ever says anything about that, but it took a long time to get that implemented. It's just you can't protect yourself from getting a blown out knee. But the way I see these quarterbacks protected now, and the way I see these quarterbacks, bait the official to call something, I just think it's that part of it is over the top. Now, the helmet to helmet contact, all that kind of stuff, the targeting, yeah, I'm all for it. I mean, there's no reason for some of that stuff. And the game has evolved. They've cleaned it up a lot. I mean, in 1991, when I first got into the NFL, they would sell it was DVDs back then, but they would sell a video that says the NFL's greatest hits. Well, I mean, on one hand, they're selling this to make money, and on the other hand, they got players injured and beat up because of it. So, I mean, and they've corrected all that since then. But yeah, it's an evolution in the NFL. But I think they're doing the right thing. They're doing their best to make a competitive, violent game to clean it up.
Yeah. What do you think is the long-term solution? I mean, so much is made right now of the head injuries and concussions. And it's interesting to talk to coaches and to talk to, players that played 10 years ago, 20 years ago, just because, the things that they're doing now for concussions obviously were not being done back then. But at the same time, it's almost like you have to baby players nowadays, if they have any sort of regression as far as the concussion protocol goes, they're out for the next game. And so it seems like there's got to be a happy medium somewhere in there. But I'm curious to know if, your take on what it might be.
It's a balance, and you're right. I see exactly what you're saying. I see a guy who's truly got a concussion and isn't taken out, and then I see someone who falls down and says they have a concussion and want to sit out for the next week. I think most of those kids just want to be part of the team. I don't think they're really competitive or want to play. They just want to be around their players. And I see it. But as far as the tools, I mean, they're doing. I've been tested a few times by the NFL to see if my genetic makeup is predisposed to concussions. Because some people you see they fall strangely and they get a concussion. Other people take a hit that gives them, they seem okay. I'm part of a study. It won't help me, but it'll help the next generation of football players know if you're genetically predisposed to concussions. Maybe you should choose another sport or do something a little less violent, I guess, than football. So there are strides being made, and I think a lot of them are the behind the scenes. But the things we see on the forefront, I agree with you. I mean, when I see some kids come in and say they've got a concussion, they don't know what a concussion is. But the other thing is that having a concussion is very subjective. I mean, if someone is concussed and they're knocked out. Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
But other than that, I mean, I would argue, and a lot of people disagree with me, I would argue that I could tell people that have concussions even more than some doctors can, because I've seen it enough, I've experienced it enough. I know what it looks like. But a doctor can come in, they can give you a test or whatever, but they don't really know. I mean, an ACL, you can do an MRI, you can tell. And these micro concussive hits, all these little hits, when you see stars after you hit, you're not knocked out, but you're like, whoa, what happened? Was that a concussion? Do multiple of them add up to something bigger down your life when you're 60 years old? Nobody knows, but we're trying to figure that out.
Yeah. Well, and it's even rampant. I don't know how much you see it in high school basketball, but I see it all the time in college basketball, even when I call games. Just somebody always has a concussion, it seems like. And, it's part of the frustration for coaches, I think, a lot of times, is because it's like, well, they were fine, they were fine 2 days ago, but now, like, they had took a backward step, and now they're out for Lord knows how long because, something didn't go exactly right. So It's just, I guess it's a different era.
It's tough for coaches. It's tough for coaches, but you have to err on the side of caution. I mean, kids at 20, that you've got to live in that body a long time. You don't want to do something rash that's going to affect you, 20 years down the road. So I do believe in erring on the side of caution, especially when it comes, you've only been given one body and you don't want to make it any worse.
You're clearly, a very dynamic person that has a lot of interests, even unrelated to football. What would you say, your purpose in life is day to day now? That kind of the big football part of your life and career is behind you.
Purpose in life. Oh,
yeah.
Boy.
Or I
didn't know we were going to get that.
I guess I guess let me rephrase. What drives you day to day now?
Mostly it revolves around my family and my kids, but wherever I can fit in my expertise or my knowledge of football or sports, I try to help out there. But yeah, it revolves around family and faith, I guess you'd say. Yeah, I've been given I retired at age 34. So there's a lot of things I can do. I do a lot of philanthropic things, on a lot of philanthropic boards, raise money for, like the Scott Miller Fund. And so, I like doing those things and they have a purpose and they will last forever. So, yeah, I guess I'll have to give any more thought to that. On the surface, that's kind of what drives me, I guess.
Yeah. What would be your advice? I think something that no matter what age you are when you stop playing football or, if you're playing whatever sport at a high level, there comes a time where, you're not playing that sport anymore. And I think for some people that's a hard transition to make, whether it's at the end of their college career or at the end of their pro career. So what advice would you have, for football players just about, moving on to what is next in their life and making that transition?
Well, be multidimensional. I mean, you don't live in one stratosphere, I guess. You need to experience other things. If your whole life revolves around football, the day you stop playing football, there will be nothing. So everybody should be diverse and have other things in their lives, no matter what they are, sports or your job or whatever your passion is. And if your passion is sport, that's great. But know that when it's over, you're going to need to head a different direction. That's hard to say to a 16-year-old who they don't care about anything but sport. But yeah, as you get older, always keep your options open.
Yeah. Finally, I just wanted to get your prediction for Saturday, and I'm sure as a former Bison player and the radio analyst that you probably almost need to pick a certain team, and you would like to pick a certain team, but just, your prediction for Saturday's game. You don't necessarily have to give a score, but I would imagine you probably think it'll be close.
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to turnovers. The team that turns over the ball more is going to have a less chance of winning. But these are two teams that covet that ball. I mean, they protect it like nobody's business. So I'm looking forward to a great game. Obviously, I want the Bison to win. But I think when you look at the final stats, I think you'll see the team that turned the ball over more lost the game. I mean, so that's kind of my go-to stat. And I think really two evenly matched teams here. I think that's going to be the stat that'll make the difference.
Nice. Well, Phil, I wish you a great week in Frisco. I'm sure it'll be nice, probably weather-wise, to go somewhere a little warmer because I'm in the St. Louis area this week, and it's I think it's 3 degrees outside here, so I can only imagine what it is in Minnesota right now. I'm guessing negative, I don't know, 20 or negative 15 or something.
Well, it hasn't been to zero in the last 3 or 4 days, so. In Texas, and when I say it hasn't been to zero, it hasn't been above zero in the last 3 or 4 days. So anything in Texas is going to be better. But you go to Texas, it's going to be 70, and it's not. It's it's 40s and maybe a 50, but still better than here in Minnesota.
Yeah, and I'm sure at that point 50 will feel balmy compared to what it has been.
Yes.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time and making the time this week. It was great to talk to you, and best of luck this Saturday on the call.
Okay, thank you, Kelly.
Bye.